What is data? Well, the short of it is that data is information. Anything that's information is data. That's what it comes down to. And so you've experienced data before, I'm sure, in your lives, from what you see, the people you see, the animals, the environment. Data could come to you in the form of information in a newspaper or any article that you might read, even online. Um, Information you get from social media like Facebook. And so, information is all around us, data is all around us. But for the purpose of this course, data is really going to come down to two types, quantitative and qualitative. Now, quantitative to me tends to sound like quantity. And so those are numbers. So data that comes in the form of numbers such as your age or height or your IQ, your income level, anything like that would be quantitative. The qualitative has to do with qualities. And so those are going to be categories or groups such as hair color, eye color. It could be height if height is recorded as, short, medium, tall, something along those lines. It could even be age if age is recorded as infant, toddler, youth, teenager, young adult, adult, retired, labels like that. And so sometimes a concept such as age or height can be recorded as either categorical, which is another name for qualitative, or quantitative. And so those are going to be the two types that we're really focusing on through this course. So I made a lovely tree diagram over here that summarizes that. Again, quantitative will always be numerical, and qualitative will typically be words or descriptions. Not always, but pretty much if it's a word or description, it is definitely qualitative. If it's a number, it is almost always going to be quantitative. Now, there is an exception on the qualitative side where it could be numbers, and that would be, for example, it might be an interval, such as if you were recording age as 0 to 1, and the first subject used in the study is somewhere between 0 and 1 years old. Second subject's also between 0 and 1. The third is between 1 and 4. The fourth is between 1 and 4. The fifth is over 60, and so forth. And so there you're seeing numbers, but they are intervals. Alternatively, you might see maybe gender. And instead of recording it as M or F for male or female, it might be recorded as 0, let's say, for male, and 1 for female. And so you could have data that look like this, where they are numbers, but the magnitude of those values doesn't matter. In other words, it's not saying that, remember, 0 male, 1 female. It's not saying females are 1 unit better than males, or that there's 100% more females than males. It's just a value representing a category or group. And in this case, those groups are male and female. And so that is the one exception on the qualitative side, where you have numbers, but those numbers are categories. And so the values of them really don't matter. I easily could have chosen -1 for male and +1 for female. So, or I could have chosen 2 and 3 or 10 and 20. Whatever it is, those groups, those numbers correspond to groups. That's my point. Now, quantitative data further breaks down into either discrete or continuous type data. Think of it this way: continuous type are data or values that can potentially have decimals. And I emphasize that can because it's not about whether there are decimals. It's about whether you have been precise enough to record decimal values. And so I have age here as an example. Typically, when someone asks what your age is, you will say 18, 21, 22, maybe at most you might put a half in there. But the fact is that an 18-year-old could have been more precise and said, I am 18.13 years old. Now, typically that's not going to happen, but it could have happened. And so when you have that scenario where you could have reasonably have had decimal places, that is a continuous variable. If you couldn't have decimal places, such as the number of eggs that a chicken lays, and they either lay a whole egg or no eggs, so they could have laid 2 eggs or 10 eggs or 3 eggs or 0. There's not going to be a 3.5 eggs laid. And so in that case where you couldn't have had decimals, that is going to be a discrete type variable. Or number of students in a class. Whole students come to my class. I never have just the arm of a student or the head of a student. That would be kind of gruesome. But in that case, this is another discrete type variable where you're not going to have pieces of the subject. And so again, discrete can only be integer valued. You can't have decimals, whereas continuous could have decimals even if you don't use them. And so that's how you distinguish between the two types. So let's go ahead and put this to practice. We've got the first one here, which I did just talk through, is the number of eggs a chicken lays, qualitative or quantitative. So number of eggs, that's going to be integer valued. It's going to be numbers. And so in this case, I would say that's going to be quantitative. And since I'm saying it's quantitative, I want to know, is it discrete or continuous? Well, they're only going to be whole numbers or integer valued. And so it's going to be discrete. And that is problem 1. Let's take a look at one that we haven't done yet, and that's number 2 here. What might your data look like if you collected observations of height as quantitative variable? And so height, if it's quantitative. So what might look like? Well, I know that we tend to say height in terms of feet and inches, but let's just convert it into a single unit. And so let's go with, we could do inches. And so for me, I might have, let's see. And so here we might have a list of values such as 70 inches, or maybe 72, or 59, or 63, another 63. It's possible 2 people have the same height, and so forth. And that's in inches. And so I could have reported decimals. Maybe it's 63.2, but I didn't. And so in this case, it doesn't ask it, but this would be a continuous type variables because you could have fractions of an inch. Continuing on. Number 3, is the number of biological siblings a person has qualitative or quantitative? And so if I ask someone how many biological siblings they have, some responses that I might get are maybe 0, or 1, 1, 2, 3, 2, 6, 5. I think my mother-in-law has 8. And so you could have values like these. Now, some people might view half siblings as partially related, and so they might say 2.5 half siblings. That kind of gets a little tricky there. But if you stick with purely whole biological siblings, same mom and dad, just to keep it simple, you're not going to have any fractions in that case. And so to answer the second question here, if quantitative, is it discrete or continuous? I would say that this is going to be discrete. Which brings us to the last one. What might your data look like if you collected age as a qualitative variable? And so I described this earlier, and I'll do it again. And so if age is qualitative, and so in that case, we might have, let's see, you could record it in intervals or words. And so maybe it's infant, toddler, a teenager, and this isn't necessarily in order, youth, adult, or retired, or elderly, whichever way you want to say it. And you may have other descriptions that go in there, but those being words would be qualitative. And that's it. That's really what I expect you to get out of knowing different types of data, different types of variables, and how to recognize what they are.